Okay, thanks very much for staying. So what I was going to do is I was going to give a little bit of a workshop on some of the things that I've talked about in the adjudication. Because it's all very well to say you should do this, you should do that, but I'd like to demonstrate a couple of things. Now, I'll use my own music to do that because I've been writing lots lately. And I've got some pieces that demonstrate different aspects. So one of the ones that I'm going to start with is I talked about controlling different aspects of the music through technique. I talked about staccato and legato. So, you know, if you've got a riff like that or this, they're very, very different things. So I'll just play you a little piece, and you can hear a variety of tones and textures in this piece. And then I'd actually be quite interested in your feedback on how the piece affects you as well. So this is a little piece called Beach Party, and it uses some very distinctive techniques. It's not very long, it's only about a minute long. What that piece is all about is differences in articulation. That I've got a palm muted bass, and I've got chords which ring on like that. Then I've also got a dynamic section just using simple chords. So using F sharp minor to E 3 times, and I voice each chord differently. So at the start, I've got the third on top, to the third, then I've got the fifth, to the fifth, then I've got the root, to the root, and while those chords are developing like that, it's a very straightforward trick, the dynamic increases. And then I've got a total change of texture, where I've got a riff, and I've got the bass droning away in the bass like that, under 3 different inversions again, and then a high one, so the whole piece is all about articulation, and the idea is to draw you into that through this kind of what's coming next sort of feeling about the piece, and that affects the way that that you perform, because you're thinking of delivering something to an audience. You want that audience to be thinking, what's next, what's next, what's coming? And even with a relatively simply textured piece like that, like it's not a complex texture, and so I'm only doing one thing at a time, then it nevertheless has that effect of rolling on and engaging the audience in like that. Now I'm going to do another one that's a little bit similar actually. This is again just like very simple chords, but it uses the bass in a different way. Now I was commissioned by Trinity this year to write a new grade 6 piece. And for the Trinity commissions, they have a very specific agenda. They say, you must write a grade 6 piece, it must last between 1.5 and 2.5 minutes long, it must be in the key of blah, it must be in the time signature of it, can go so fast, and there's a whole list of very, very specific parameters. This particular one, they said, we want a country piece. and we wanted to use what's called Travis picking. Do you know what that is? Well, Merle Travis was a guy, a very great guitar player in the 1940s and 50s, and he developed a technique which is used widely in country music, where you have a bass, and you mute the bass, and then you play the tune over top. And when I was a kid, I was forced to, I'm a sad child. I spent time learning Three Blind Mice in the Travis style, and I still can do it. It's bizarre. So you start off with the main tune, then you put the tune on, and on you go. Then you put a middle section, a contrasting note in. Then you put some passing tones in. Sort of a Chet Atkins style Three Blind Mice. But what's really interesting about that is the bass, with the accent on 2 and 4, with that spit on 2 and 4, maintains pretty well all throughout. And that's known as the Travis style of picking, like that. And if you want to hear a really good exponent of that, who's alive and playing today, because Chet Atkins was the most famous exponent of that style. He's dead. But his work lives on with an Australian guitarist called Tommy Emmanuel, and Tommy's big news. He'll fill stadiums with his performances, and there's tons of YouTube stuff. He's a bit of a lad. He's a sort of Australian drummer, and he really shows off a lot of performance, but he's incredibly good. So you could listen to Tommy Emmanuel, and then you'll hear a great exponent of the Travis style. So that shows some of the things that I want to play. Now, I was going to do a piece that's entirely chords now, and just show you how chords, we think of chords as being strung. Actually, I'll just turn down a sec here. Lighten up a bit. Get my tone. I didn't do this before I started, so that's a bit cleaner. You think of chords. Although, some of the things we heard, they were much more subtle than that. Anyway, here's a piece that's just chords, and see what you think and what you think of what I've done with it. pull that out for a sec. So, I'll sit down now. So what I was trying to demonstrate in those was a variety of tones, techniques, attitudes towards the music. So what's a melody, what's an accompaniment, what's rhythmic, what can I do with it to make it work. So trying to work the guitar to produce those different things. And also, did you notice how I ended each piece? So say that this is my last chord. Hold on, stop, don't move. Frame it in silence, then you're finished. And that little gesture actually has the knack of making something seem almost a bit more special than it might have otherwise. You know, that you can take a performance, even if you've screwed up in it and you've made some mistakes, you know, if you finish with a sense that it was a performance and you've played right to the last note, whatever it is, even if it's a big dramatic thing, stop. And then you frame it with that moment of silence right at the end. All good performers do it. I heard a really stunning thing on Facebook the other day. Somebody was putting up the last performance of a famous pianist playing Schumann. And the last note of this performer's career, you know, the very last note, it just went on forever. It was like sort of this. That's just fantastic. And that's working the piece and the audience and working the performance, which is really what I wanted to demonstrate in this. Do either of you have any questions about what I did, about anything about the pieces or about the techniques or about guitars in general?
When you're learning those sorts of things where there's multiple aspects, do you sort of break them down and start by doing each individual bit, or do you just try and do it all?
Well, I wrote those, so I kind of...
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so I sort of did them all at once, really.
Yeah.
I wrote them and memorized them at the same time.
Okay.
But if somebody else had written them, like if I was learning them off a chart, very occasionally I would learn something separately. For example, I'll give you an example. So I might have learned going together with that. Oh, can't do it. But you get the idea. Actually learning those, and when you've got multiple things happening at the same time, sometimes it's a good idea to learn them separately. You know how guitarists are, though? We clench everything up together, and so if you've got a C chord, and I was going to learn this, oh, here's a great tune. It's a famous heavy metal ballad. It's called Mary Had Some Nice Roast Lamb. I might learn that separately, or I might learn... or I might try it in a minor key. That's the lamb's point of view. It's going to be roast lamb soup. It's not too happy. But I might learn bits separately in that case as a learning technique. Yeah, you're quite right. Very often, sometimes I'll try and change the way I've learned something by actually learning it separately. And sometimes I'm shocked I can't play it separately because being a guitarist, I always think in clusters of, you know, where my hand is at that time. So it's a really, really good question, that. And I would say, yes, learning parts separately as a technique is probably less than a third of the time that you do it, but sometimes it's a really good technique. I've said to a couple of people today that I thought they should think about things like legato versus staccato. And so if you've got a bass line that you're really going to work with, you should practice it both ways. So, you know, you've got a choice of whether to play it staccato or legato. Yeah, good question. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Anything else?
When it comes, obviously, guitar, there's so many different styles you can play on the instrument, and they all require sort of different technique. I am sort of very interested in Latin sort of music, but how, I mean, obviously they're all linked in some way. How do you know when to sort of use which technique, because they overlap, but some work better for different
Yeah, well, for me, it's working in two ways, because we've been talking about my compositions as well, so I'm being a composer and a performer as such, so that's particularly difficult. If I was just thinking of just learning the piece and thinking how to attack it, what I would try and do is what I call, everybody calls contextualizing the piece. So, if you take something like, if you take a blues, and you were to play it, there's very little emotion expressed in that, and you could ask yourself, well, it's a blues, what is the blues? And then you listen to somebody, a great blues performer, and you might find yourself playing it with a bit of kind of a funky snap sort of thing. You'd be doing a George Benson on it, where it might be like or you could do a Muddy Waters on it, where you actually just play it. Then you sing the lyrics. I don't know what you're doing to me. And you contextualize the performance in it, maybe as a famous performer would do it. Or I only ever, there's a great blues performer called Johnny Hooker. And I only ever heard him play once. It was in 1974. I went along and I was with all my friends in Vancouver. And it was none of us had ever heard of an authentic Chicago blues player before. And Johnny Hooker, I mean, he's as authentic as it gets, And he came on stage, and it was in A, I remember. And he started playing. Like that. And he comes in with that vocals that I just did. I know, He's doing that, he's carrying on like that. We're going, oh man, this is fantastic, this is a real thing. We're actually hearing the real blues, from a real blues artist. And that's like after 5 minutes. And on it went like that. Carry on. And after about 10 minutes, we're like that. And we're all starting to sweat, thinking, oh no, he's going to do this all night. And then suddenly, we hadn't noticed the band come on. They bum, 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 bum. And they went to the subdominant. There was this collective sigh of about 500 white blokes all with that. And it was such a lesson to me in working your music and your audience, because a tiny amount of material, massive talent in the performer, and just made the audience sweat with it. So that it's really how you do it. Contextualizing in style is a really good thing. So Latin, because Latin can be anything from Latin jazz in the classic sort of thing, kind of Jobim style. Dum, da, da, dum. Very sophisticated kind of da, 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 dum. That sort of style. But other Latin music is incredibly boisterous, So, you think of La Bamba, for example, as Latin music. So it depends on the context of the song, what you want to express, but listening to other performers is a really good way forward. Listening in music. I am just amazed that sometimes, in classical music in particular, we have a differentiation between learning a piece and listening. I think, how could that possibly be? What else is there in music? Like, do you see it? I've just played a whole bunch of music. Where is it? Well, it's in your mind. That's all. It's a total illusion. It doesn't exist. And yet we give our lives to it? How weird is that? So I think that the listening thing has got to be considered much more importantly than it often is in education in particular. Anything else? Okay, well, I've contextualized my own work now. I've done what I said. So, thanks for listening. Thanks, Graham, for asking along. And we'll